The Great Hall of Harmony Prime was filled with light. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy had gathered to celebrate 500 years of peace. Flags of 100 worlds hung from the ceiling. Music played softly. Diplomats laughed and shared drinks. It was supposed to be a day of joy. General Park Do-yoon stood at the center of the stage. He was an old man now, with gray hair and deep lines on his face. But his back was straight, and his eyes were still sharp. He wore his white dress uniform, the one reserved for peaceful occasions. No weapons, no armor. That was the tradition. Behind him stood Admiral Yoon Mi-rae, his second in command. She was younger, with cold eyes and a face that rarely smiled. She watched the crowd with the careful attention of a soldier who never truly relaxed. 500 years ago, General Park began, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Humanity and the Velthari Dominion ended the bloodiest war this galaxy had ever seen. We signed the Great Accord not as friends, but as survivors. We were tired of death. We were tired of counting our dead. The Velthari delegation sat in the front row. They were tall beings with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Their leader, a diplomat named Overlord Kryn, watched the human general with barely hidden contempt. Peace is not easy, General Park continued. It requires us to forgive things that cannot be forgotten. It requires us to trust those who once tried to destroy us. But we chose peace anyway, because the alternative was too terrible. Ambassador Kim Yoonji sat in the human section. She was a small woman with kind eyes. Her husband had died in the last battle of the war, 500 years ago. She had devoted her life to making sure his death meant something. Watching General Park speak, she felt hope. Then the world changed forever. The plasma bolt came from somewhere in the upper balcony. It moved too fast to see. One moment General Park was speaking about hope. The next moment there was a hole in his chest. He looked down at the wound with surprise. Then he fell. Admiral Yoon caught him before he hit the ground. Blood poured over her white uniform. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but she knew it was useless. She had seen enough death to know. "Dahan," she whispered. "Stay with me." The hall erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran. Security forces swarmed the balcony. But Admiral Yoon did not look away from her general. General Park grabbed her arm with surprising strength. His eyes were fading, but his voice was clear. "Mi-rae," he said, "don't let them forget what we became to survive." Then he was gone. Admiral Yoon held him for a long moment. The chaos continued around her, but she did not hear it. She was thinking about his words. She was thinking about what they meant. Security forces caught the assassin within minutes. He was a Velthari male, young and wild-eyed. He screamed about human devils and Velthari glory. He belonged to a group called the Unbroken, extremists who had never accepted the peace treaty. The galaxy held its breath. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. The Velthari government released a statement within hours. They expressed regret at the incident. They called it the work of a lone extremist. They offered their condolences to humanity, but they refused to hand over the assassin. "He is a Velthari citizen," Overlord Kryn announced. "He will be judged by Velthari law. This is our right under the treaty." Admiral Yoon watched the announcement from the bridge of her ship. Her uniform was still stained with General Park's blood. She had not changed. She had not slept. She had not eaten. "They are lying," said Captain Kang Jeong, standing beside her. "The Unbroken have support in the Velthari government. Everyone knows this." "Yes," Admiral Yoon said quietly. "Everyone knows." On Earth, President Choi Sun-woo addressed the Human Federation. He was a gentleman who had spent his career avoiding conflict. Now conflict had found him. "We demand justice," he said. "We demand the assassin be handed to human authorities. We demand a full investigation. The treaty requires this." The Velthari response came quickly. No, the matter was internal. Humanity should accept the official explanation and move on. Ambassador Kim Yoonji wept when she heard this. She had believed in peace. She had given everything for peace. Now she watched it crumble. Across human space, something began to change. In orbital shipyards that had been silent for centuries, lights flickered on. Ancient machines began to hum. Workers received strange orders from military command. Prepare the fleet. On colony worlds, veterans who had never known war felt something stir in their blood. Stories passed down through generations suddenly felt less like history and more like instruction. The funeral of General Park Do-hyun was held on Earth 1 week later. Billions watched. The ceremony was simple and dignified, as he would have wanted. But at the end, something unexpected happened. Instead of the traditional bells of mourning, a different sound rang out across the planet. Deep, heavy tones that had not been heard in 500 years. The war bells. Admiral Yoon Mi-rae stood at the grave of her general. She listened to the bells and thought about his last words. She understood now what he had been trying to tell her. Not what humanity should become, but what humanity had been. They forgot, she whispered to the grave. They forgot what we are. But we remember. Far away, in the halls of the Velthari Dominion, Overlord Kryn laughed at human grief. They were weak, he thought, emotional. They would cry and complain and eventually accept reality. He had made a terrible mistake. In the darkness of space, 200 warships began to move. Ships that should not exist. Ships that had been built in secret, maintained in silence, waiting for a day that everyone hoped would never come. The day had come. The 500-year peace was over. And humanity was waking up. President Choi Sun-woo had not slept in 3 days. He sat in the war room beneath Earth's surface, surrounded by screens showing reports from every human colony. The messages were all the same. The people wanted blood. We cannot go to war over one death, said his advisor, a thin man with worried eyes. The Velthari outnumber us 3-1. Their fleet is larger. Their technology is equal to ours. Tell that to them, President Choi said, pointing to the screens. Protests filled every major city. People carried signs with General Park's face. They chanted his name. They demanded action. Admiral Yoon Mi-rae entered the room. She had finally changed her uniform, but her face still carried the weight of what she had witnessed. She saluted the president and stood at attention. Admiral, President Choi said, what are our options? We have many options, sir. But first, you need to understand something. She pressed a button on the table. The screens changed. They now showed ship designs, weapon systems, fleet positions. The peace treaty required both sides to reduce military capability. The Velthari reduced theirs by 40%, as agreed. And us? Admiral Yoon smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We reduced our visible military by 40%. But General Park knew that peace bought with trust alone is no peace at all. For 500 years, we have been building. In secret. In silence. President Choi stared at the screens. The numbers were impossible. This cannot be real. It is very real, sir. 200 capital ships. 1,500 support vessels. 3 million trained soldiers spread across hidden bases. Weapons that the galaxy has never seen. She paused. We never stopped preparing for this day. We simply hoped it would never come. The advisor stepped back, his face pale. This violates every treaty we signed. Yes, Admiral Yoon agreed. But the Velthari shot our general on neutral ground. They have violated the treaty first. Now we respond. Far away, Captain Kang Jeong stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance. It was a new ship, built in secret, launched only days ago. Her crew was young and eager. They had trained for this their entire lives without knowing it. "Captain," her communications officer said, "we have received our orders." Kang Jiang read the message on her screen. Her mission was simple but dangerous. General Park's body had been taken by the Vulturi as evidence for their investigation. Humanity wanted him back. "Set course for Vulturi space," she ordered. "We bring our general home." On the science station orbiting Mars, Dr. Shin Tihi stood before a sealed vault. She was old, with white hair and hands that shook slightly, but her mind was sharp. She was the last living person who knew the codes. "Are you certain about this?" asked the military officer beside her. "No," Dr. Shin admitted. "These weapons were sealed for good reason. They are terrible things. My grandfather helped create them to end the First War. He spent the rest of his life regretting it." She began entering the codes. "But the Vulturi have forced our hand. May the universe forgive us." The vault opened. Inside were files, blueprints, and prototype devices. The Prometheus archives. Weapons so powerful that both sides had agreed to never use them again. Gravity bombs that could crush a moon. Neural disruptors that could kill every living thing on a planet without damaging a single building. And worst of all, the Sun Eaters. Devices that could make a star go dark. "Send everything to Fleet Command," Dr. Shin ordered. "Production begins immediately." The galaxy began to notice that something was wrong. Alien traders reported strange activity in human space. Military ships were moving. Shipyards were active. Signals were being sent in codes that no one could break. Elder Morvith was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy. He belonged to a species called the Watchers, who recorded history but never interfered. He had lived through the first human-Vulturi war. He remembered what humans were capable of. When he saw the reports, he felt fear for the first time in centuries. "They are waking up," he whispered to himself. "The sleeping giant is waking up." He sent messages to every major power in the galaxy, warning them, begging them to stay neutral. Whatever was coming, he said, no one should stand in humanity's way. Overlord Kryn received these warnings and laughed. "The humans are weak," he told his advisors. "They have grown soft in peace. They will threaten and complain, but they will not fight. They do not have the strength." Then his sensors detected something impossible. 200 human warships appeared simultaneously in neutral space. They had been invisible until that moment, hidden by technology that should not exist. They formed a line along the border of Vulturi space. They did not move. They did not attack. They simply waited. Admiral Yu Mai broadcast a message to all frequencies. Her voice was calm and cold. "This is Admiral Yu Mai, Supreme Commander of the United Human Fleet. The Vulturi Dominion has violated the Great Accord. They have murdered our general. They have refused justice. Therefore, the treaty is ended." She paused. "You have 48 hours to return General Park's body and surrender his killer. After that, we come to take them ourselves." Across the galaxy, alien species watched in disbelief. The peaceful humans, the traders and diplomats and artists, had transformed overnight into something terrifying. On a distant space station, a Vulturi ambassador spoke with his aide in a shaking voice. "The treaty," he said. "We thought it protected us from them." His aide shook his head slowly. "No, the treaty gave them time. Time to become something worse." The 48 hours began to count down, and the galaxy held its breath. The 48 hours passed. The Vulturi did not respond. Overlord Kryn sat in his throne room, surrounded by his generals. They had fortified every border system. They had gathered the largest fleet in Vulturi history. 5,000 warships waited to crush the human threat. "Let them come," Kryn said with confidence. "We outnumbered them 20-1. This will be a short war." His generals nodded and smiled. They had studied human military capability. They knew the numbers. Victory was certain. They were wrong. The Battle of Callistation lasted 6 hours. It was supposed to be a simple defense. 200 Veltri ships protecting a supply depot. The humans attacked with 50 ships. When it was over, the Veltri had lost all 200 ships. The humans had lost 12. Admiral Yu Mairi reviewed the battle footage on her command ship. She felt no joy at the victory, only grim satisfaction. The new weapons worked exactly as designed. How is this possible? Lieutenant Bei Junho asked. He was young, fresh from the academy. His grandfather had helped negotiate the original peace treaty. Now Junho watched that peace burn. Their ships just stopped working. Neural disruptors, Admiral Yoon explained. We target the crew, not the ship. Every living thing aboard dies instantly. Painlessly, at least. She turned away from the screen. General Park would have hated this. He believed in fighting with honor. And you, Admiral? She was quiet for a long moment. I believe in winning. We can discuss honor after. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. Other species watched in horror. The humans they knew were peaceful merchants and curious explorers. These humans were something else entirely. Elder Morvath, the ancient watcher, decided it was time to show the galaxy the truth. He opened his archives and released footage that had been sealed for 500 years. Footage from the first human Veltri war. The galaxy watched and learned what humans truly were. They saw human soldiers fighting with missing arms, refusing to stop until death took them. They saw human pilots ramming their ships into enemy vessels, sacrificing themselves to save their companions. They saw human civilians on a dying colony world, releasing poison into their own atmosphere to kill the Veltri invasion force along with themselves. They saw a species that did not know how to surrender, a species that would burn their own worlds rather than let enemies take them, a species that had looked at extinction and chosen to become something terrifying instead. This is what they were, Elder Morvath said in his broadcast. This is what peace allowed them to forget. But they remember now. And the galaxy should pray they choose to forget again. On the Veltri homeworld, Overlord Kryn watched the footage with growing fear. He had studied human military reports. He had read their diplomatic communications. But nothing had prepared him for this. These were not the humans he knew. These were monsters wearing human skin. His advisors rushed in with more bad news. 3 more battles. 3 more defeats. Human forces were cutting through Veltri defenses like fire through paper. They did not fight like normal armies. They did not follow normal rules. Offer them terms, Kryn ordered, his voice shaking. Execute the assassin. Give them whatever they want. But Admiral Yoon refused to accept his communication. We had 500 years to learn what humans are, she broadcast in response. You chose to forget. Now the lesson continues. Lieutenant Bei Junho struggled with what he was seeing. He had grown up believing in peace. His family had dedicated generations to maintaining the treaty. Now he watched human soldiers glass Veltri cities from orbit. Is this who we are? He asked Captain Kang Ji-yong. They were orbiting a conquered world, watching fires burn on the surface below. Captain Kang was silent for a long time. This is who we can be, she finally said. When pushed far enough. When hurt deeply enough. This is the darkness inside us. She turned to face him. The question is not whether we have this darkness. Every species does. The question is whether we can control it. Can we? She had no answer. On the conquered worlds, something strange began to happen. Human soldiers did not behave like typical conquerors. They did not torture prisoners. They did not abuse civilians. They killed efficiently and without mercy in battle, then immediately began providing aid to survivors. A Valkyrie child named Veth hid in the ruins of her home. Her parents were dead. Her city was burning. She expected the human soldiers to kill her when they found her. Instead, they gave her food and water. They wrapped her in a warm blanket. A human medic treated her injuries with gentle hands. Why? Veth asked in broken common language. Why help me? You killed my family. The medic, a woman named Sergeant Ohana, looked at her with sad eyes. Because your family did not shoot our general. You did not start this war. And we do not make children pay for the sins of their leaders. Veth did not understand. Neither did most of the galaxy. The humans killed without hesitation, then healed without condition. They were monsters and angels at the same time. Back on Earth, protests began to grow. Not everyone supported the war. Ambassador Kim Yoonji led the peace movement, demanding that humanity show restraint. We are becoming what we fought against, she declared. General Park died for peace. This war dishonors his memory. But her words were drowned out by the roar of warships launching from orbit. The machine of war had started, and it would not be easily stopped. Admiral Yoon looked at the star map showing human advance. They were winning. Soon the Valkyrie homeworld would be within reach. Soon she would have to decide how far humanity was willing to go. In her quarters, she kept a picture of General Park. She spoke to it sometimes when no one was watching. How far is too far, old friend? She whispered. When does victory become something worse than defeat? The picture did not answer, but his last words echoed in her mind. Don't let them forget what we became to survive. She was beginning to understand what he meant. The war had lasted 8 months. Human forces stood at the edge of the Valkyrie home system. One final push would end everything. The Valkyrie would be destroyed as a species. Their worlds would burn. Their children would die. Admiral Yu Mai had the power to make it happen. The Sun Eaters were ready. One command from her, and the Valkyrie sun would go dark. Billions would freeze to death in the endless night. She stood alone in her quarters, staring at the weapon authorization codes on her screen. Her finger hovered over the button. One touch. That was all it would take. Her door chimed. She closed the screen quickly. Enter. Sergeant Ohana walked in. She looked tired. The war had aged her. But there was something else in her eyes now. Something like hope. Admiral, you need to see something. She followed Ohana to the medical bay. Rows of beds held wounded soldiers, both human and Valkyrie. In the corner, a small figure sat wrapped in blankets. It was Veth, the Valkyrie child. She's been with us for 3 months now, Ohana explained. She was terrified at first, but she has started to trust us. Watch. Veth looked up and saw the Admiral. Her eyes widened with fear. But then a human boy ran up to her, a young patient recovering from injuries. He handed Veth a piece of fruit and smiled. Veth smiled back. They've become friends, Ohana said softly. A human and a Valkyrie playing together like the war does not exist. Admiral Yoon felt something crack inside her chest. For months, she had thought only of vengeance, of justice for General Park, of making the Valkyrie pay. But looking at these 2 children, she saw something different. She saw the future. Why did you show me this? She asked. Because I know what you are planning, Admiral. Ohana's voice was steady but kind. I know you have the power to end the Valkyrie forever. And I needed you to see what you would be destroying. Admiral Yoon said nothing. She returned to her quarters and stared at the authorization codes again. The weight of billions of lives pressed down on her shoulders. Her communication screen lit up. It was Ambassador Kim Yoonji calling from Earth. Admiral Yoon, Kim Yoonji said. Her face was lined with exhaustion. Please, I know you have the Sun Eaters. I know you can end this with one command. But I am begging you to stop. They killed him, Admiral Yoon said. Her voice broke slightly. They killed Do-yeon right in front of me. They need to pay. They have paid, Kim Yoon-ji replied. Their fleet is destroyed. Their empire is broken. Their people live in fear. How much more payment do you need? All of it. I want all of it. Kim Yoon-ji was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a simple question. What would he want? The question hit Admiral Yoon like a physical blow. She knew the answer. Of course, she knew. General Park had spent his entire life building peace. He would believe that even enemies could become friends, given enough time and understanding. He would hate what she was about to do. His last words, Admiral Yoon whispered. He said not to let them forget what we became to survive. Yes, Kim Yoon-ji said. But think about what he meant. He did not say to become that thing again. He said not to forget. There is a difference. Admiral Yoon closed her eyes. Memories flooded through her. General Park teaching her to play chess. General Park visiting wounded soldiers in hospitals. General Park standing in the rain at his wife's grave, crying silently. General Park smiling at alien children during diplomatic visits, showing them magic tricks with his old, scarred hands. He had been a warrior. He had done terrible things in the First War, but he had spent 500 years trying to be something better, trying to prove that humans were more than their capacity for destruction, and she had almost destroyed everything he built. I understand now, she said quietly. I finally understand. She deleted the Sun Eater authorization codes. The next morning, Admiral Yoon broadcast a message to all human forces. Her voice was different now, softer, more tired, but also more human. This war is over, she said. We have proven our strength. We have shown the galaxy that humanity cannot be attacked without consequence. But strength without mercy is just cruelty. And we are better than that. She announced new terms. The Velthari Dominion would surrender. They would pay reparations. They would hand over all war criminals. But they would survive. Their species would continue. General Park did not die so we could become monsters, she continued. He died believing that peace was possible. I will not dishonor his memory by proving him wrong. On Earth, Ambassador Kim Yoon-ji wept with relief. On conquered worlds, Velthari civilians emerged from hiding to find human soldiers offering them food instead of death. Across the galaxy, other species watched in amazement. The humans had won completely. They had the power to commit genocide. And they chose not to. Elder Morvath recorded the moment for his archives. He added a note that would be studied for centuries. Today I witnessed something remarkable. A species stood at the edge of total victory, with the power to destroy their enemies forever. They had every reason to do so. They had suffered greatly. They had earned vengeance. But they chose mercy instead, not because they were weak, because they were strong enough to stop. In the medical bay of the flagship, Admiral Yoon visited Veth one last time. The little Velthari girl looked up at her with curious eyes. Are you going to hurt my people? Veth asked. Admiral Yoon knelt down to meet her eyes. No, little one. The hurting is done. Why? The Admiral smiled sadly. Because a very wise man taught me that true strength is knowing when to stop. She left the medical bay and walked to the observation deck. Outside, the stars burned quietly in the darkness. Somewhere out there, a Velthari sun still shone. Because she had chosen to let it. I hope I made you proud, old friend, she whispered to the stars. I hope this is what you wanted. The stars did not answer. But for the first time in months, Admiral Yu Mai felt at peace. 2 years had passed since the war ended. The galaxy was slowly healing. Ruined worlds were being rebuilt. Refugees were returning home. And on the rebuilt station of Harmony Prime, a new treaty was about to be signed. Admiral Yu Mairei stood in the same hall where General Park had died. The blood was long gone, cleaned away by time and renovation. But she could still see it. She would always see it. "Are you ready?" asked Ambassador Kim Yoonji, standing beside her. "No," Admiral Yoon admitted. "But that has never stopped me before." The hall filled with delegates from every major species in the galaxy. Humans sat on one side. The remaining Velthari leadership sat on the other. And in between sat representatives from dozens of neutral worlds, watching with intense curiosity. The new Velthari leader was a young female named Overlord Thyssen. She had risen to power after Krin's death, promising a new path for her people. She was nervous as she approached the treaty table, and Admiral Yoon understood why not the last time their peoples had met in this hall. It had ended in blood. President Choi Sun-woo stood to address the assembly. He looked older now, worn down by the weight of war. But his voice was strong. "We gather here today not to celebrate victory," he said. "Victory is a cold thing when it is built on graves. We gather to build something new. Something better. A peace that is not based on fear alone, but on understanding." He gestured to the treaty document on the table. "This agreement is different from the one signed 500 years ago. That treaty asked both sides to forget the past. This one asks us to remember." Overlord Thyssen stepped forward to speak. Her voice trembled slightly. "My people made a terrible mistake. We allowed extremism to grow in our midst. We looked the other way when fanatics spoke of human destruction. We thought ourselves safe behind a treaty we had no intention of honoring." She paused, gathering herself. "We were wrong, and billions of my people paid for our arrogance." She turned to face Admiral Yoon directly. "But humanity also showed us something we did not expect. You could have destroyed us completely. You had the power and the right. Instead, you showed mercy. Why?" Admiral Yoon walked forward until she stood face to face with the Velthari leader. The hall fell silent. "Because General Park did not die so we could become what killed him," she said simply. "He spent his life building bridges between our peoples. Destroying yours would have burned every bridge he ever built. We do not deserve your mercy. Perhaps not. But mercy is not about what people deserve. It is about what we choose to be." Admiral Yoon gestured to the crowd. "Look around this room. Humans, Velthari, and dozens of other species, all sitting together. This is what the general fought for. This is what he died for. This moment." The treaty was signed with great ceremony. Both leaders pressed their marks to the document. Both pledged to honor its terms. But the most important moment came after. A small figure walked to the stage. It was Veth, the Velthari child from the medical bay, now 2 years older. She had been adopted by Sergeant Ohana after the war. She was the first Velthari to be legally raised by humans. Veth stood before the assembly, looking impossibly small against the vast hall. "I was supposed to hate humans," she said in careful, practiced words. "My people taught me that humans were monsters. But monsters did not give me food when I was starving. Monsters did not heal my wounds. Monsters did not sit by my bed and sing me songs when I was afraid to sleep." She looked at Ohana, who was crying quietly in the audience. "My human mother taught me that hate is a choice, just like love is a choice. And I choose love." The hall erupted in applause. Humans and Velthari alike stood to honor the courage of one small child speaking simple truth. Elder Morvath recorded everything, as he always did. But his notes this time were different. They were not observations of war or politics. They were something more personal. "I have watched 1,000 species rise and fall," he wrote. "I have seen empires built on conquest and empires built on trade. But I have never seen anything like humanity. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the oldest or the wisest. But they are the most remarkable, because they contain within themselves both the greatest capacity for destruction and the greatest capacity for mercy. They can be monsters or angels, often in the same moment. And what makes them truly terrifying is not their weapons or their persistence. It is the fact that they choose. Every single time, they choose. The galaxy feared them when they went to war. But the galaxy should fear them more now. Because a species that can win completely and then choose mercy, that species will outlast us all. 50 years later, a joint human Velthary exploration vessel sailed through uncharted space. Its crew included both species working side by side. The old hatreds had not disappeared, but they had faded. Children grew up learning about the war in history classes, not in bomb shelters. A young Velthary officer named Thess approached an old human veteran in the ship's observation lounge. The human's name was Junho, and his hair had turned gray long ago. "Sir," Thess asked respectfully, "may I ask you something?" "About the war?" Old Junho smiled sadly. "You want to know what it was like? Everyone your age does. I want to understand. My grandmother survived the human advance. She said humans were demons from the void. But then she also said humans saved her life when she was wounded. I cannot make these two things fit together." Junho looked out at the stars for a long time before answering. "We showed the galaxy what we could become," he said finally. "The full darkness that lives inside humanity. We showed them our monsters. And the galaxy was right to be terrified. But then we showed them what we chose to be instead." The old man turned to face the young Velthary. "That is the real reason they fear us, young one. Not because of what we did, because of what we did not do. We stood at the edge of becoming something unforgivable, and we stepped back." Thess considered this for a moment. "My grandmother says humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. She is correct. But she also says she trusts humans more than any other species. Also correct." Old Junho smiled. "We are dangerous because we can be anything. And we are trustworthy because we choose to be good. Both things are true. Both things will always be true." Outside the observation window, the stars stretched endlessly into the darkness. Somewhere behind them, two civilizations that had once tried to destroy each other were now building a future together. It was not a perfect future. Old wounds still ached. Old ghosts still haunted. But it was a future. And that was enough. Admiral Yun Mireille had died peacefully in her sleep 10 years earlier. Her last words, spoken to Ohana and Veth at her bedside, were simple. "Tell them I kept my promise. Tell them I never forgot." She was buried beside General Park, as she had requested. Their graves stood together on a hill overlooking Earth, facing the stars they had both loved. The inscription on her tombstone read, "She had the strength to destroy a civilization. She had the wisdom to save one instead." And far away, on 1,000 worlds, children of all species learned about the war that almost destroyed everything, and the mercy that saved it. They learned that true power was not the ability to take life. True power was the ability to give it back.